Somewhere right now, someone just checked their bank account and felt a small, quiet sense of relief. Not because anything dramatic happened, just because the number looked fine, normal. You'll see in this video the habits that quietly keep people poor, not the obvious ones, the ones that actually feel responsible. Think about that for a second. Nobody gets into financial trouble by consciously deciding to fail. Most people who struggle financially are doing things that feel completely reasonable, things their parents did, things their friends do, things that look from the outside like normal adult life. Paying the minimum on a credit card, waiting for more stability before investing, treating a paycheck as permission to finally relax a little. None of these feel like mistakes. They feel like common sense. Here's the uncomfortable question worth asking. What if the habits that feel the most normal are exactly the ones quietly working against you? Think about someone you know, someone responsible, someone who pays their bills on time, who doesn't gamble or overspend recklessly, and yet somehow never seems to get ahead. That person isn't lazy. They're not making some obvious dramatic mistake. They're doing what feels normal. And normal, it turns out, isn't the same thing as effective. Stay with me until the end, because by the time this is over, you'll recognize which of these habits you're carrying too, and exactly what to do about it. To understand why these habits feel so normal, we need to look at where normal actually comes from, because normal isn't neutral, normal is inherited. Think about how most people first learn to handle money, not through lessons, not through deliberate teaching, but by watching a parent pay bills at the kitchen table, watching how stress showed up or didn't when money got tight, watching what counted as a reasonable purchase and what counted as reckless. None of that gets explained out loud. It gets absorbed quietly over years. So by the time someone is old enough to make their own financial decisions, they already have a deep, unexamined sense of what normal looks like. Pay the minimum, keep the rest for living, that's normal. Wait until things feel stable before investing, that's normal too. Treat a bit of extra income as a reward, not a tool, completely normal. Here's the problem with all of this. Normal was never designed by anyone with your long-term outcome in mind. It was simply passed down, generation after generation, shaped by whatever the previous generation happened to believe, whether or not it actually worked. And because everyone around you is doing roughly the same thing, none of it ever gets questioned. If everyone you know pays only the minimum, paying the minimum doesn't feel risky. It feels like what responsible people do. If nobody around you talks about investing early, waiting doesn't feel like a missed opportunity. It feels like patience. This is how quietly damaging habits survive for decades, not because they work, but because they're common, and common gets mistaken for correct. That's where this problem actually begins, not with bad intentions, but with an inherited definition of normal that nobody ever stopped to examine. Consider, too, how this inherited normal gets reinforced outside the family, not just inside it. Advertising rarely sells patience or restraint. It sells immediacy. Buy now, worry later, financing available, easy monthly payments. Every one of these messages quietly normalizes the idea that waiting is unnecessary and that comfort now matters more than a slightly uncertain future benefit. Add that to the family inheritance already in place, and the message becomes almost impossible to escape without deliberate effort. Not because anyone is being deceived, exactly, but because an entire environment, family, and culture together keeps pointing in the same direction, over and over, from childhood onward. So if these habits get inherited so quietly, why do they still feel so unshakable, even once someone becomes an adult, making their own decisions? Because unlearning something is much harder than learning it in the first place. Consider how deeply repetition works on the human mind. A behavior repeated for years, watched, absorbed, practiced without resistance, becomes something close to instinct. By the time someone is old enough to think critically about money, the habits are already running on autopilot, beneath conscious thought. There's something else working against people here too. Financial media, most of it focuses on dramatic mistakes, gambling away a fortune, a wild spending spree, a scam that wipes someone out overnight. Those stories make headlines. They're vivid, memorable, easy to warn people about. But the quiet habits, the ones that never make headlines, rarely get the same warning. Nobody writes an article titled, "This man quietly paid only minimums for 15 years." It's not dramatic enough. And yet that quiet pattern can cost someone far more over time than a single reckless decision ever could. So an entire category of financially damaging behavior simply flies under the radar, never named, never flagged as a problem because it doesn't look like a problem. It looks like ordinary life. Add to this something specific about how comparison works. Most people don't measure their financial habits against some ideal standard. They measure themselves against the people around them. If your friends carry credit card debt too, yours doesn't feel alarming. If nobody in your circle started investing young, starting later doesn't feel like falling behind. The comparison group becomes the standard, and if the comparison group is also carrying the same inherited, unexamined habits, everyone quietly confirms to everyone else that this is simply how things are. This is how the pattern becomes so deeply embedded, not through one bad decision, but through years of ordinary life, repetition, and comparison, all pointing in the same quiet direction. There's one more layer worth naming here, specific to how families talk, or don't talk, about money across generations. Most people never actually hear their parents explain the reasoning behind a financial habit. They simply observe the outcome and copy the behavior without ever learning whether it was a good decision or simply the only one available at the time. A parent who paid only minimums, for example, might have been dealing with circumstances no child could see, a layoff, a medical bill, genuine hardship that made minimum payments the only realistic option in that season. But the child watching doesn't inherit the context. They inherit the behavior, stripped of the reasoning, and carry it forward as if it were simply how responsible adults handle credit cards, regardless of their own circumstances being completely different. This is part of why breaking these patterns feels so disorienting at first. It's not just changing a habit, it's questioning something that feels tied to family, to identity, to what a responsible adult is even supposed to look like. There's a specific kind of resistance that shows up here, worth naming honestly. Sometimes questioning an inherited financial habit can feel like a quiet criticism of the people who taught it to you. Nobody wants to imply that a parent or a grandparent did something wrong, so the habit gets protected, almost unconsciously, not because it works, but because abandoning it feels like abandoning a piece of family loyalty. This is worth separating clearly. Questioning a habit isn't the same as blaming the person who passed it down. Most people did the best they could with what they knew, often under circumstances that made certain choices feel necessary at the time. Recognizing that a habit no longer serves you isn't a judgment of anyone's character. It's simply an update, applied to your own life, using information that may not have been available or relevant to the generation before you. If you ask most people to name their biggest financial mistake, they'll usually describe something dramatic, a bad investment, an impulsive purchase, a decision they clearly regret. Here's the mistake underneath that answer. Assuming that financial damage only comes from dramatic decisions, the quiet habits, the ones that feel completely normal, rarely make the list because they were never experienced as a decision in the first place. Consider minimum payments. Paying only the minimum on a credit card feels responsible. You're not ignoring the bill, you're paying something. But that minimum payment is often structured, quite deliberately, to keep the balance alive for as long as possible. Interest accumulates faster than the minimum reduces it, and a purchase that felt small in the moment can end up costing 2 or 3 times its original price, spread out silently over years. Nobody experiences that as a mistake while it's happening. It just feels like managing bills. Here's what makes this particular habit so effective at hiding its own cost. The monthly statement shows the minimum due prominently in large, clear print. The actual cost of only paying that minimum spread out over years rarely appears anywhere on the same page. Someone would have to seek out that information deliberately using a calculator or a separate tool to ever see the real number, and almost nobody does, because nothing about the normal experience of paying a bill prompts that kind of investigation. Consider waiting for stability before investing. This one feels almost virtuous. I'll start once things settle down. I don't want to invest while I'm still figuring things out. But stability, defined that way, rarely arrives on its own schedule. There's always a new expense, a new uncertainty, a new reason the timing doesn't feel quite right. Meanwhile, every year of waiting is a year that compound growth doesn't get to work with. The cost of that waiting is invisible because nothing dramatic happens. The money simply isn't growing that could have been. Consider treating income increases as permission to relax. A raise arrives and spending quietly expands to match it almost automatically. This doesn't feel reckless. It feels like enjoying the fruits of hard work. But it means that no matter how much income grows, the actual financial position never really improves, just the lifestyle surrounding it. Here's the deeper mistake underneath all three of these examples. Treating doesn't feel like a mistake as the same thing as isn't a mistake. Those are two completely different things. And confusing them is exactly what allows quiet, normal-feeling habits to cause real damage over years, without ever once triggering the alarm that a dramatic mistake would immediately set off. There's a fourth habit worth naming here too, one that rarely gets discussed with the same attention as debt or investing. The habit of having no real plan for when something goes wrong. Most people don't consciously decide to skip building an emergency fund. They simply never quite get around to it. There's always something more immediate competing for that money, and eventually quietly becomes the permanent plan. This feels normal too. Most people around them are in the exact same position, living paycheck to paycheck with no real cushion, so it never registers as unusually risky. But the absence of a plan is itself a decision. It just doesn't feel like one until the moment something unexpected actually happens and there's nothing there to absorb the shock. So here it is, the part that actually separates people who quietly build wealth from people who quietly stay stuck. They stopped asking, "Does this feel normal?" and started asking, "Does this actually work?" That single shift in the question changes everything downstream. Take minimum payments again. Someone asking whether it feels normal will keep paying the minimum indefinitely because it does feel normal. Someone asking whether it actually works will run the numbers, see the real cost of that interest over time, and prioritize paying it off aggressively instead. Take waiting for stability before investing. Someone asking whether it feels normal will keep waiting for a feeling that may never fully arrive. Someone asking whether it actually works will recognize that starting small, immediately, beats waiting for a perfect moment that compound growth doesn't care about. Take treating raises as automatic permission to spend more. Someone asking whether it feels normal will let their lifestyle quietly expand with every raise indefinitely. Someone asking whether it actually works will redirect at least part of every increase towards something that builds before spending catches up to match it. Take having no real plan for emergencies. Someone asking whether it feels normal will keep telling themselves they'll start eventually, since almost everyone around them is in the same position. Someone asking whether it actually works will recognize that even a small, imperfect emergency fund changes what happens the next time something unexpected occurs, turning a potential crisis into a manageable inconvenience. Here's what makes this shift so powerful. It doesn't require rejecting everything familiar. It simply requires pausing occasionally and checking a habit against evidence instead of against how common or comfortable it feels. Most financially damaging habits can survive being questioned once. They usually cannot survive being questioned repeatedly, honestly against actual outcomes. The people who build lasting financial security aren't following some secret system unavailable to everyone else. They're simply willing to ask an uncomfortable question regularly. Is this actually working, or does it just feel normal because everyone does it? That question, asked consistently, is often the entire difference between decades of quiet struggle and decades of quiet progress. Let me tell you about two people. We'll call them Derek and Monica. Both grew up in similar households. Both learned roughly the same lessons about money, mostly by watching, not by being taught directly. Derek carried those lessons forward without much examination, minimum payments on his credit card because that's what felt manageable, waiting to invest because things never quite felt stable enough, treating each small raise as room to relax a little more. None of these choices felt reckless to him. They felt like ordinary adult life. Monica started out the exact same way. Same habits, same unexamined assumptions carried forward from the same kind of household. But somewhere in her late 20s, something shifted. She stumbled across a video that mentioned, almost in passing, how much a credit card balance actually costs when only minimums are paid. She went home that night and actually calculated her own numbers. The result surprised her enough that she started questioning other habits too. Not all at once, not dramatically, just one at a time over the following year. She started paying more than the minimum, even when it meant a slightly tighter month. She opened a small investment account, even though nothing about her life felt particularly stable yet. She kept her spending mostly flat for a year, even after a raise, redirecting the difference instead of letting it quietly absorb into her lifestyle. None of this happened without friction. There were months where paying extra toward the credit card meant skipping things she would have normally bought without a second thought. There were moments of doubt, wondering whether the small amount going into her investment account was even worth the effort, given how modest it looked on the screen. But she kept a simple note on her phone, updated every few months, tracking the actual numbers instead of relying on how things felt, and watching those numbers move, slowly but consistently, in the right direction became its own kind of motivation, one that feelings alone had never provided. There's a third person worth mentioning here too, someone named Aisha, a coworker of Monica's, who watched all of this happen from a distance. Aisha didn't change anything at first. She noticed Monica's choices, thought they seemed reasonable, but told herself she'd start once things calmed down. 2 years passed before Aisha finally made similar changes herself, starting later than Monica, but earlier than she otherwise would have, simply because she'd watched someone close to her actually do it first. What finally moved Aisha wasn't a dramatic conversation, it was something much smaller. Monica mentioned casually over lunch one day roughly how much her small investment account had grown over 18 months. It wasn't a huge number, but it was real, specific, and coming from someone Aisha knew and trusted, not from a stranger online or a vague statistic. That specificity did something a general warning never could have. It made the abstract idea of starting sooner matters feel concrete, attached to a real person living a life very similar to her own. 10 years later, Derek's financial position looked remarkably similar to where he'd started, adjusted only slightly for inflation. His habits had never changed, so his trajectory never changed either. Monica's position looked completely different, not because she earned dramatically more than Derek, but because a decade of slightly better habits, compounding quietly, had produced a very different outcome. Aisha's position sat somewhere in between, closer to Monica's than to Derek's, despite her later start. Neither Monica nor Aisha did anything extraordinary. They simply stopped accepting normal as the same thing as working and made small adjustments, repeated consistently over years. So if a little of Derek's story sounded familiar, here's the good news. Every habit described in this video can be questioned and changed, starting today. The first step is making a full, honest list. Write down the financial habits you currently consider just normal, how you handle debt, how you think about investing, what you do automatically whenever extra money arrives. The second step is running the actual numbers on at least one of them. Pick the habit that feels most automatic and calculate its real cost or real opportunity, honestly, using real figures instead of a general feeling. The third step is treating minimum payments as a last resort, not a default. Whenever possible, pay more than the minimum, even a modest amount more, because the interest math rewards this far more than intuition suggests. The fourth step is starting to invest before you feel ready, rather than waiting for a feeling that may never fully arrive. A small, consistent amount started now will typically outperform a larger amount started years later simply because of time. The fifth step is creating a rule for raises before the next one arrives. Deciding in advance that some fixed portion of any increase gets redirected towards savings or investing, rather than leaving that decision to be made in the moment when the pull toward lifestyle expansion is strongest. The sixth step is starting an emergency fund, even a small, imperfect one, rather than waiting for a moment when building one feels comfortable. Even a few $100s set aside changes what an unexpected expense actually means, turning it from a crisis into an inconvenience. The seventh step is finding at least one person, like Aisha found in Monica, who's a little further along in questioning these habits than you are. Proximity to someone actively doing this work makes it dramatically easier to start doing it yourself. The eighth step is repeating this process periodically. Habits worth questioning once are usually worth questioning again every year or so, as circumstances change and old assumptions quietly creep back in. None of these steps require earning more money first. They simply require treating normal as a starting point for a question, rather than as a final answer. If this video helped you spot a habit worth questioning in your own life, that's exactly why this channel exists. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the conversations still to come. Somewhere right now, someone just made a minimum payment and felt nothing unusual about it at all. Somewhere else, someone decided again to wait a little longer before investing, telling themselves it simply isn't the right time yet. Neither of them feels like they're making a mistake, and that's exactly the point of everything this video has tried to explain. The habits that quietly keep people stuck rarely announce themselves. They wear the disguise of ordinary, responsible life. They look exactly like what everyone around you is already doing. Think about Derek, Monica, and Aisha one more time. Same starting habits, same inherited sense of what normal looks like. The only real difference was whether at some point each of them stopped accepting normal as good enough and started asking whether it actually worked. That question is available to you too right now before you finish watching this. Not some distant day when everything finally feels stable. Today, with whatever habit comes to mind first when you think back over everything this video just described, it's worth remembering that none of these habits cause damage in a single moment. They cause damage through repetition, through years of the same small choice made automatically without ever being re-examined. Which means the reverse is true as well. Changing one habit, even slightly, and repeating that change consistently can undo years of quiet drift, simply by pointing the same daily pattern in a different direction from now on. So the real question isn't whether your financial habits feel normal. Of course they do. That's exactly why they've lasted this long. It's whether normal has actually been working for you, or whether it's simply been familiar enough that nobody, including you, ever stopped to check. Here at The Bigger Picture, we'll always explore the financial questions that truly matter, not with fear, not with sensational headlines, but with honest conversations, clear explanations, and the bigger picture behind every story.